Welcome to the Recover You podcast. I'm Kylene.
And I'm Patrick.
We are a couple in recovery
from sex addiction
and betrayal trauma. Together, we share our story to encourage you on your journey. It's here that we talk about sex addiction, betrayal trauma, mental, emotional, and physical health, faith, and anything and everything needed to recover you to your most authentic self that God created you to be. Hello, 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 hello. What are we going to talk about? What is that song? Hi, Patrick.
Because of the wonderful things he does.
The things
the
he
Wizard
does.
of Oz.
Oh.
Off to see the wizard.
Yes. Okay. Well, there you have it.
Yep.
Fun fact tidbit for the day. Today, we're going to talk about...
I'm going to be the wizard in this conversation. Yeah.
Are you behind a curtain right now?
I probably should be.
Are you all powerful?
Yes. Everyone should remember that I'm all powerful.
Okay, so today we're going to talk about I'm so mad. When is anger healthy and when it's not? So this is something that, and when we talked about just now, you said, oh, so this is an episode for the betrayed. Not necessarily. I think actually this is just an episode for humanity. But of course it comes up with the betrayed, and I sometimes the addict in recovery too. We've talked about how some irritable emotions come up, and they have to be really careful to keep those in check. And so I actually think this is more an episode just for humanity. Mm-hmm. Like anger is an emotion that we feel. I think there is a lot of confusion around anger. At least I see this with a lot of clients that there's different patterns, right? Some people are going to feel anger. Like if you're talking about the betrayal community, some women are going to feel anger right away, and it's going to be expressed right away. But then I also see that sometimes it doesn't show up until after the disclosure. So again, we've talked about the idea that when your nervous system actually has some safety provided to it. If you hear squeaking, that is, I think Coco's trying to get us to play with her. So sometimes the strong emotions will actually come up after a little bit of stability has been created. And so that might be 3, 6, 9 months even down the road. So people sometimes will have a delayed anger response, and they'll feel a lot of other things first. Shock being a big primary one that can take a lot of time. But then I also see like this third category where sometimes it's almost like people don't know how to feel angry, or they don't think that it's a justifiable emotion. Like they think that there's something wrong with it. And so they've never really learned how to express it in healthy ways. And they actually view it as something that is bad. So I think there's a lot of like beliefs around this emotion, fears around this emotion. Obviously, it's something that it is one of the emotions that can be expressed in a very negative way, right? Like happiness can't really be expressed in a way that's bad. Usually you don't really associate that. Anger, of course, there's levels to that I think we even talked about this in the last episode, right? There's always a line. And so we can associate anger with, abusive behaviors, right? And so that's the extreme of how it can manifest. And so I think there's a lot of fear, a lot of misconceptions around it. And so today I just sort of want to talk about some basic concepts around the idea of when is this a healthy emotion and when is it not?
The grieving process has anger as one of the stages in it. And so you're right from an anger standpoint. I know I don't generally get angry about a lot of things. I have gotten angry. And I know the times when I've gotten angry, I've been like, I sometimes will feel bad because I felt like I've lost control. You know what I mean? And stuff like that. So like that, I think that's why I generally don't like to get angry. Or if I'm angry, I'm like, okay, what is going on beneath that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're definitely going to talk about
it. Is it okay to be angry about this right now, or is it some other emotion? Is it a fear? Yeah. So anyway.
Yeah, we're definitely going to go into that when we're kind of breaking down the healthy versus the not. And I think that's actually one of the biggest keys is having a level of self-awareness around that. But again, like we're not necessarily taught that, right? Maybe it was modeled a certain way growing up, or maybe we haven't seen, I think healthy conflict is a good thing. We were talking about last week, right? Like a lot of people don't actually get that demonstrated in their home growing up. And so maybe they'll see a certain pattern of things are fine, and then there's an explosion. And so they just associate anger with crossing that line, right? Going into explosive behavior and hurtful words and, maybe abusive behaviors and things like that. So let's talk about just the concept of anger itself and when it is actually a healthy, okay thing. So again, kind of connecting this to last week's topic, all emotions are valid, right? I love pointing my clients to the movies Inside Out, now 1 and 2. And most people are at least familiar with the idea of the movie, even if they haven't seen it. But to have a visual expression of what is going on in your brain, and associating your emotions with little parts of you is so helpful. And I think I'm so glad that Pixar did that, because it really is based on the therapeutic modality of internal family systems and what we call parts work. And that's just, it is the way our human existence kind of functions. But if we aren't given a picture or we aren't given words to it, we can kind of categorize things in ways that it's like we shun something that we don't understand, right? And so all emotions are valid. So anger is going to be a valid emotion. There's normal, healthy moments in our life when we should be angry. And that's actually I'm even going to say the right response, right? And so the first one is anger is a normal emotion when a boundary has been crossed. I guess I would ask the question, if you weren't to feel angry on some level, and again, this does not have to mean any sort of extreme or any sort of crossing lines or anything, but the emotion itself, the presence of that emotion, if you weren't to have anger, what would be a response to things that are, when a boundary that you have is being disrespected and being crossed?
Like, what's another emotion that you could?
No, I'm saying it's a healthy emotion to have. It exists in its healthy way. It exists in that scenario.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, if we didn't have that, what would we have? Right? Because all the other emotions that you'd maybe mention, like indignation, frustration, they're all wrapped up in anger,
mm-hmm.
right? As like the overarching umbrella. So one time when it is normal and healthy is if you've set a boundary or you have a boundary and it is crossed. And you can even see that too, I think, when you're angry with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And when you feel frustrated with yourself, a lot of times it's because we refuse to respect our own internal boundaries with ourselves. So we will cross our own boundaries. We'll set a goal and then we won't do it. Or we will say yes to someone when we should have said no. And we're crossing our own boundary of needing more space, needing more resilience, needing more time, or whatever it is, right? Needing more rest. And then, of course, if somebody else flagrantly crosses your boundary. And obviously in this podcast, the first thing that comes to people's mind is going to be breaking your promises to each other, right? And someone stepping over that boundary and hurting you. It's a normal reaction to be upset about that. It's a normal reaction to have anger come up because a boundary has been crossed. It's a normal, healthy response. The second thing that's and similar and wrapped up in that concept, the second situation where it's normal to be angry about something is when a wrong has been done, but it motivates you to instigate change. So anger can be a very useful emotion in certain circumstances where it actually prompts something to shift in your life. So we can notice, like, I'll give an example, and I feel like with this podcast, people probably have a sense of like who I am at this point, right? Maybe not to the depth that you do, but a pretty good sense. Like, it's a good snippet of our lives. We talk about a wide variety of things. We get a lot of thoughts out, and it's pretty sincere to who we are as human beings, right? You tell me if you disagree with this. I don't think I get angry about a lot of things. I'll get riled up about a lot of things and kind of like passionate about things, but I don't get angry about a lot of things. One of the things, though, that will really upset me is when I think that wrong is being done, but it's being done in the name of God or in the name of Jesus or, the name of Christianity. And I'm saying that as an example of like, when there's something like when you feel like there is an injustice, there's a disconnect. It's an obvious right and wrong, right? It's a normal thing to have the emotion of anger come up. That I think sometimes we're so used to viewing it as bad, we can go, oh my gosh, why am I feeling angry? That shouldn't be my natural response. But it is natural. It is normal to feel that there is something wrong here. And it can be, in the right circumstances, in the right format, a motivating emotion, right? So in this podcast as an example, right? We noticed that something is wrong. We had a motivation to then make some sort of a change, right? So we want to talk about it. We want to change things. We want to educate people. We want to communicate more. So not all of that was motivated by this happy, lovely emotions of flowers and joy, right? There was a lot of pain. There was a lot of indignation. There was a lot of, why does the world work this way? Why are these messages out there? Why aren't people being helped, right? And so in the right situation, anger can be a catalyst, I think, in many ways, when it instigates you to change. And then the third way that I think it can be healthy is primarily when you acknowledge that it exists. So we're not shunning it, right? We talk about this in a variety of ways with lots of different topics through the podcast, but the idea of, again, it is valid because it exists, period. Any emotion that's going to come up from you, it deserves recognition. And so if anger comes up, it can be healthy when we choose to acknowledge it and then we integrate and utilize healthy tools to process it. And I'm actually going to share a few of those later. But those are kind of the three things that come to mind when I think about anger being a healthy emotion.
Yeah. I mean, it certainly is a fuel. Like, it can be a fuel, like if I, wanted to work out on January 1st, I'm going to work out, and then I sleep in, and then January 2nd, I'm definitely going to work out, and then you sleep in again, and then January 3rd, you're like, that's it, and you kind of get angry about it. But it's not something that's like damaging. You're not destroying your house or throwing your pets across the room or anything like that. You actually, the very next day, you actually make change, and you go, why am I not getting up? Maybe I need to move my phone. So then when the phone alarm goes off, I get up out of bed and I go grab that, and now I'm up, and then I go work out. So you're right. It can fuel some change.
So the situations where it would not be healthy, which is probably where most of us typically go when we think about anger, would be when it's expressed to others in an unproductive or unhelpful way. So obviously that's going to be, and we've touched on this in a couple of the episodes, but when in your communication, you are crossing a line from expressing anger into denigrating or hurting someone else with your words or with your behaviors or your actions, that's when it totally crosses a line. So it's okay to even to communicate to your partner, because again, sometimes I see it, this is a struggle where women are like, I don't feel like I'm allowed to express anger. Like, that's wrong. You're absolutely, and I think it's right to express anger when you've been hurt, when your boundaries have been crossed, when things have been done that hurt you. Like that emotion and that reality and that consequence needs to be expressed. I think one of the things that happens in some relationships where everything is attempted to be so tightly controlled is that when the betrayed partner doesn't fully express the anger, the addicted really, I don't think, ever gets the full picture of like what is happening in their inner world.
Sure.
So it really is very, very important. But when it's unhealthy is when it's expressed in ways that are intentionally attacking, denigrating, disrespecting the other person as a human being, right? So that's when if you ever in therapy speak, it would be that they teach you a lot in communication how to speak in I. I feel this. I feel this. I think this. This behavior has made me feel like, right? Mm-hmm. And when you communicate that, there's almost no end to what you're allowed to say there, because you're just communicating your reality, your lived experience, what's going on in your inner world, in your thoughts, in your emotions at that time. When it shifts and becomes unhelpful, unproductive, and potentially wrong or quote unquote bad is when you just go full on attacking the other person, right? Now, there may be situations in life where one, that happens, or two, maybe it's even deserved. But when in general, what we're talking about here is broad spectrum, large brushstrokes. And the concept of communication in a healthy way is always going to be healthier when you're focusing on communicating your lived experience to the other person. And that's not only because it's a kinder way to do it from you to them, but it's also because on their side, it's going to be much more well received and way less triggering. And so you're already going to shut down most of the defense systems if you're not going on attack mode.
There's actually some parallels to raising kids and leading an organization. They actually tell you to do that. Like, don't attribute somebody's underperformance to them being lazy. Say, hey, this is where your behavior is not meeting the standard, or if like your kids will frustrate the heck out of us. That's just what kids do. But like, as opposed to saying you're a disrespectful little bleep, maybe you could say, hey, the way you're coming across to me right now makes me feel disrespected. Right. And it's really important because in those, this is an interesting dynamic, but in the two examples that I gave, there's a power dynamic. And when there's discovery and betrayal, a power dynamic does come about. And so let's say in the well-intent, or the addict who wants to do the right thing and is really trying to say, hey, yep, I'm going to change and everything like that, to be told that you're just a big pile of steaming poo, versus like your behavior really, really makes me angry. The behavior I discovered, that addict's already in a lot of shame. And so it can really make that process a lot worse.
Well, I'll even take it the other extreme, where maybe they're not an empathetic addict. Maybe they don't really care that they've hurt you. It's not going to make you feel better if you are being abused to turn into the abuser verbally.
Mm-hmm.
And so you don't want to match bad with bad.
Right.
Now that also doesn't mean that you want to match abuse with being, a submissive doormat.
Ghost.
Yeah, where you don't communicate your boundaries, that you don't follow through on the consequences of those boundaries. That's not what we're saying at all. But anger is, I think, if I'm pausing here to think about it for a second, I think it's the one emotion that can be misused to the point of abuse. Every other emotion really doesn't have extremes like that. And that's why I think there's so much confusion around it. So there are limits to how it can be expressed in a healthy way. And that's what we're talking about. And you never want to stop yourself from expressing it in the healthy way. That's where we're trying to communicate, making sure you absolutely feel like you have the right, if you are feeling angry and somebody has hurt you, to share that. And there's ways to do that, and to not suppress the emotion itself, because it is there trying to tell you something.
Mm-hmm.
And so the fact that it exists means that it needs to be processed or communicated in some way. We listened to a video the other day, and the guy was talking about communication. And I thought it was a really good example, because he was saying, how did he view it? He viewed it like a knot. And if you have conflict in the relationship, and your goal is to be proven right or to be validated on your side of things, then you just pull the knot tighter on your side, versus if you approach conflict in a way of, sort of expressing yourself and understanding the perspective of the other person, then what you're doing through that type of conversation is beginning to unknot. You're beginning to untie the knot.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought I was thinking about that, and I was like, I think that's generally how we do try to approach it, is kind of understanding the perspective of the other person. And I think that's one of the reasons that we tend to be fairly good with communication. And that made a lot of sense to me, because it's the whole concept of, if you are listening to what's the phrase? If you're listening to respond versus if you're listening to understand. And it's the same thing if you're communicating to attack versus if you're communicating to be heard, right? And to be understood. And so we have to be careful about that. Like, just as much as you want that person to validate and understand you, they want that from you, however that's coming across. And anger is one of those things that typically like hides a lot of more vulnerable emotions. And so it can be really easy if someone expresses anger to you to respond with anger back, as opposed to approaching everything with curiosity, right? And again, none of us are going to be perfect. It's not like if you showed up one day from work and you were really mad and you were yelling at me, I can't say that I would sit here and be like, Patrick, what's going on with you? Why are you so, maybe I would, I don't know. It would be so out of norm for you. Maybe I would ask the question, but our normal response would be to like match that emotion, right? And so when we can learn about this though, it can help. And when one of my points is that like we will make mistakes, right? Like we will make mistakes. There's times where we will just match each other's level, period. That's going to happen in a relationship. But if as the general rule in your relationship, you can understand and communicate that you're on the same team and like, I want to know you, I want to help you. And the goal that we have as a couple is to see each other, to understand each other, and to support each other, then that's where you can kind of approach these conversations and conflict a little bit differently, kind of with that approach of like untying the knot. So that's the healthy way to do it. The unhealthy way that we were talking about is when it's expressed in the unproductive, unhelpful, attacking. Like that doesn't make you feel better. It doesn't actually, that's not a way that will help you actually process that emotion. Yeah. Because a lot of times if you go that route, you're going to continue feeling unsettled because you haven't actually processed the reason you feel angry internally. And then there was no resolution. So it's a very unproductive, very, very unproductive way of communicating anger, is just by having verbal explosions. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the second way that anger can be unhealthy is when it is holding a deeper or when it is suppressing a deeper emotion. So you mentioned that a little bit earlier. And so again, anger can be a primary emotion. Again, when we were talking about the healthy versions, it's a normal primary response if like your boundary has been crossed. That's normal. And it's not necessarily hiding anything else there. It's like, no, I'm angry about that. You did something wrong. You hurt me. Anger is the natural response. That's the primary emotion. There's nothing secretive here, right? When it can become unhealthy is when we kind of hold on to it instead of allowing the deeper levels to come through. So let's say we express anger early in betrayal, and we get so used to that pattern because it is a way that we feel the other partner will hear us, or it's the only way we've really learned how to set a clear boundary is that I have to be angry. And then let's say safety is established and you find yourself 3 months, 6 months down the road, I'm still angry. Well, at that point, it's like, have we ever felt the grief at that? Where's the grief here? Where's the sadness? Has that been fully expressed? Because when anger can be unhealthy is when it's actually not anger. It's more of a defense mechanism for sadness or for grief or for depression, things that are more vulnerable emotions.
Yeah, I actually think fear is a big one. Anger covers up fear quite a bit. And for whatever reason, as you're talking, I'm thinking about the classic example of, hey, can I check your phone? And then the addict goes, why do you want to look at my phone? Don't you trust me? Like, like reacts in kind of an overdone way. Yeah. That's a fear. It's a fear of, oh my gosh. And maybe if they're in recovery, there's nothing there, but the pattern has scared them. Right. And so, that's very much a fear. It's masking a lot of fear there.
Yeah. And the reason we would, because most people, if you sit down and go, do you want to be angry the rest of your life? They're going to go, no. Right. So why would we then choose that? It's what's called a secondary gain. A secondary gain is like this hidden benefit that we get from a behavior or an emotion, and we're not consciously aware of it, which is why we end up in a pattern that we go, I don't really like this pattern, but I keep doing this pattern. So we always have to go, same thing that we talk about the addicts, right? I keep engaging in this behavior. I don't want to engage in it. You have to figure out the why. It's the same thing with any pattern, with any emotion that you feel that's repetitive that you don't like. So anger is a fairly common one, because the expression of anger feels much more powerful, and it gives you a sense of it gives you a perception of control. So you feel more powerful, you feel more energized, you feel like you're in more control of the situation if you're yelling, if you are, domineering, if you are, verbally controlling a situation by the tone of your voice, right? It feels much more powerful than if it is actually hiding the fear, like you said, the insecurity, the vulnerability, coming to the person that hurt you and saying, I am feeling incredibly insecure today, and my feelings are like extra hurt today. And I'm like 2 seconds away from crying. It feels like just like the whole day, and I'm just sad. That is so much more scary to have that conversation than to, say, you bleep, 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 you hurt, how could you do this, bleep, 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 right? So that's when it can become really unhealthy, is if it begins to become the Band-Aid for deeper things that are not being spoken, that are not being processed, that are not being allowed to come to the surface, because anger then feels a little bit safer. Yeah. And all of these things, I think, happen, again, it's a conversation for humanity. Every single person listening has had a head explosion one time and said things, and like take parenting, right? How many times have we yelled at our kids? And it's from a sense of, I'm losing control, and this person that I love is not maybe behaving in a way that makes me feel valued. Right. And so there's a wound there, actually, and we react out of anger because we think we can control our kids. And then half an hour later, we're like, oh, I feel like a piece of garbage because I said things that were not nice to them. And it didn't actually help them behave better. It didn't help me resolve the emotion because now we feel bad. Right. And it didn't help our relationship at all. Great. So like, it was a lose, lose, lose to hold on to this emotion for 30 minutes that actually made me feel for 30 minutes more powerful, or for 5 minutes, or for 30 seconds, right, while I was yelling. But now I'm going to feel bad for like the next 5 years because I feel like I've, hurt my kid. Right.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
So that's maybe an example that's, completely separated from betrayal and addict. And we can all relate to that. So I think this is important when we're talking about communication, when we're talking about different emotions. I think sometimes when we're listening to a podcast, we can always think about how it applies to the other person. And it's really important with all of these things that we go, how does this apply to me? And certainly it can, if we have certain characteristics in a relationship, it can, we can be listening to something and go, oh, that helps me understand my partner better, for sure, always. But we always want to check in with ourselves too. Like, where is this coming for me? And just like from the parenting side, you and I both had that experience, but I think I had that experience more. And part of that was that I did feel very, very insecure in my role and in my place and all those types of things, right? And so for me, I definitely have that experience of the outburst, I guess you want to say that, parenting explosions coming from a place of wounding, for sure, not from actually a place of being grounded or, any of those healthy things that we were talking about earlier. Right. The third way, and this is sort of tied into what I was just talking about, the third place where anger is really going to be unhealthy is when it's hurting you. So the first one is kind of when you're hurting others. The second one is when it's suppressing a deeper emotion and kind of, that is, it's not allowing something to be expressed. And the third one is when it's hurting you. So when it's hurting you is really going to be, okay, it's keeping me stuck. It's been keeping me stuck for a long time. I'm not liking who I am. I'm now developing bitterness, resentment. This is becoming part of my personality. And I really, unless I deal with this, cannot move forward in my own healing, right? At that point, most people, I think most people, maybe not everybody, but maybe some people just like it so much that they'll stay there. I don't know. There are some just lifelong angry people, right? But that's unhealthy, right? Everybody from the outside can see that that's unhealthy and think, man, what happened to you in life, right? So we always have to be the person, and you are that person if you're listening to the podcast, who is able to where we want to take stock. We want to do that self-reflection on a regular basis and be like, where am I at with this? Do I express it in healthy ways? Do I express it in unhealthy ways? Is it covering something else up? Is it a deeper vulnerable emotion? And am I afraid of being vulnerable? Do I have insecurities and fears around being vulnerable with myself even? Let's pause there for a second, because we talk a lot about it in terms of communicating to your partner. But I think there's a lot of examples where people will actually not want to be vulnerable or honest even with themselves about their own emotions.
Right.
And, the addict is a great example of that, because it's, I think this goes on both directions for sure, but the addict is a good example because they're not taught how to feel their emotions. So the concept of being vulnerable, which is like the weakest state, emotionally, would be really scary, because the whole concept is that, well, if I do this, I can get hurt. That's what vulnerability means. There's a possibility of getting hurt, and nobody wants that.
Right.
So most people are going to, if you're holding on to anger and that becomes your pattern, you're going to be uncomfortable with it. Right. So the important thing to do there is going, okay, how long have I been angry? Where did it come from? Is it a primary or secondary emotion? And now that it's keeping me stuck and I've decided I don't want it, I don't want to be here anymore, what do I do about it? Right. Because again, anger is communicating something, either that there's something underneath that needs to come to the surface, or it's asking you to have a conversation, or it's asking you to reiterate a boundary, or it's asking you to follow through on a consequence. And, some of the questions to think through there too is that, am I really angry at another person? Am I angry at my circumstances? Am I angry at myself?
Right.
Where is the anger coming from? So let's talk maybe about, now that we have an idea of like, there's healthy anger and there's unhealthy anger, let's talk about how to process it. This can be applied really to any emotion or any feeling. But I think I'm going to give you sort of a general thing, and you can apply it to your personal situation. If you're feeling another emotion and you want to apply it, that's totally fine. But, today we're talking about anger, and some of it's going to be specific to anger. So you're going to always start with nervous system support. This is really, again, for any emotion, but anger is going to be more activating. There's activating and deactivating emotions, right? And so anger we think of as more activating. You're riled up, you're in your sympathetic, your heart is beating faster, your brain is going 10,000 miles an hour, right? Everything's elevated, escalated, and activated. So we're going to want to calm the nervous system down. So I'm not going to give you 10,000 different ways to do that today, but I will say my favorite thing is chest tapping. You take the tips of your fingers, you tap the middle of your chest on your chest bone, and you do it where you actually kind of physically hear a thump. Okay. And that's one of my favorites. It taps into your vagus nerve, it calms your parasympathetic, calms your nervous system down to go from sympathetic to parasympathetic, which is the more calming place in your nervous system. So when we have an uncomfortable emotion, one of the first things we can do is begin to calm our body and communicate to our body that we actually are safe. So that's one of the first things I like to have people do, is start with nervous system support. There's other tools out there. You can throw your legs up against the wall. You can do deep breathing, things like that. But let's just start, as an example, with chest tapping. Okay, so tapping your chest. And I want you to, just like, this can happen in seconds once you get familiar with it. But then I want you to just pause and identify, is anger a primary or a secondary emotion? So is it one of those first couple that we mentioned where it's a healthy primary emotion? Somebody has crossed a boundary. I crossed my own boundary. Something bad is happening that's unjust or whatever. And this is a normal primary emotion. There's nothing else there. Or just take a moment to drop in and do that self-reflection and go, is this anger covering up something else like fear, insecurity, grief, some vulnerable, soft emotion, sadness, for example? So when you identify if it's a primary or secondary, now you're going to have a little bit more awareness around the emotion. Now you can view emotions, you can almost view this as a part, like we talked about earlier, or you can almost view it as like this as a child, right? So you can combine the concept of like inner child work, or it's a part of me, whatever feels good to you, or it could even look like a black little cloud, whatever works for you. But the more this part or this version of you feels seen, the more calm it's going to get. So if you think about even in a conversation you have with someone, the more you get ignored the higher your emotion is going to escalate, right? So if you are trying to communicate something and someone refuses to hear you, or they start gaslighting you, or they start shifting it back on you, that emotion, its natural tendency is going to be, I'm going to get bigger. It's not working, so I'm going to get bigger. I'm going to get louder. I'm going to get stronger, right? So if you view this as a little cartoon part, it's like you can view it as getting bigger, wider, taller, stronger, huger, larger, whatever you want to say. So as you go through like a healthy processing tool, the idea is actually that you personally, not needing external support, are going to give this part or this version of yourself validation. And the more it feels seen, the more it's going to calm down naturally. It's the opposite effect of the invalidation, where it makes it get bigger. Validating it is going to help it get smaller. So you're going to start with that nervous system support. You're going to identify what variety of emotion it is, primary or secondary. And then you're just going to take another couple seconds to notice how it shows up in your body. Like, is it in your head? Is it in your throat? Is it in your chest? Is it in your stomach? And then if you want to put a visual to it, like I said, is it a black cloud? Is it a little kid version of you? Is it a cartoon? What I think is kind of interesting, like when I'll do exercises with clients, sometimes anger, I particularly think is kind of fun to work with, because a lot of times it'll kind of show up as like a cartoon part, and it'll look one way, like maybe it'll look like a devil, or like this angry little like I don't know, just picture some cranky little cartoon, right? But then when we do the processing, by the end, it'll like change colors, or it will look much more calm, or like a happier version, or it'll shift some way, like the little visual that we have in our mind. If the emotion is moving through successfully and it's being processed, the visual can actually change.
As you're talking about this, sometimes people feel that recovery is the absence of tough emotions, but it's actually not. One of the main categories on recovery on the FASTER scale is identifying feelings. And so, as you were describing this process of chest tapping and trying to, what's the primary emotion, what's the secondary emotion, you end up, that's really what is important. Like if what is really good work for an addict, to speak from that side, is you wake up, you're not feeling good, so you take a little bit of time to go, hey, where is it? Because your old patterns, you never took that time. And so that's really important recovery work, is to do that.
I feel like nobody has ever learned how to do this. I mean, I wasn't taught this when I was a kid. Hey, Kylene, are you feeling angry? Let's do some chest tapping and name that emotion. Like nobody's taught that, right? I think maybe there's a little bit of that kind of seeping into parenting culture now, which is great. But for all of us who are like, 35 plus, that was not a topic of conversation back in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s when we were growing up, So no, that's why we as adults have to take the time now to practice this, because it's new to our brain and it's new to our body. But it's also why the emotions really respond, because maybe for the first time in your whole life, this little 8-year-old angry part of you is going to be seen and heard and loved and hugged and validated. And it, that might even feel a little overwhelming for you to be able to offer yourself that. It can be a really healing thing. So let's do the chest tapping. You're going to primary or secondary. You're going to notice where it shows up. Do you have a visual with it? And then the last piece is going to communicate with it, as if you're communicating to, again, this visual part of you, or this version of you as a child, or this, little cloud, whatever you've come up with. So here are 4, just to kind of wrap this concept up, 4 questions to kind of prompt you to ask. Once you have this basic understanding, and you can keep tapping your chest during this process if you like. You can journal this out if that's a little bit more helpful for you. Or you can just memorize this and do it in your head anytime anything like this comes up. So the first question is basically, why did you show up, or why are you here? Pretty simple, pretty basic. But let's say this is like an 8-year-old version of you. That version of you might have a lot to say. Just let them dump it out. Maybe it just is real short. And it's like, well, I'm here because I'm mad. And it's like, okay, well, let's deepen that conversation. Why are you mad? Right? And so the idea with this conversation is that you show up with gentleness, with curiosity, and with compassion. That's really the goal. If you're trying to process an emotion in a healthy way, no matter what it is, no matter how it shows up, and I would say even more so if it's showing up in what you would perceive as a negative way, like anger, frustration, irritation, you always want to approach those parts of you with compassion, with gentleness, and with curiosity. So kind of thinking about, like you're talking about, little kid, why are you here? Well, why are you mad? Well, tell me more about that, right? Get to know it a little bit. The second question would be, what are you trying to communicate? Or what do you need to tell me? Or what do I need to know from you? What are you trying to tell me, right? Because it might say something like, well, you need to stand up for yourself more. Or, because an anger part, you can think of like this little devil cartoon, like throwing its hands on its hips, right? And going, oh, like I'm going to do it for you, right? Or like the little anger emoji thing from the movie Inside Out with its little head bursting into flames, right? I need to express this emotion. I'm going to do it for you, right? Mm-hmm. So you ask it like, what are you trying to communicate? And it will tell you in its own words. And let's say it's like an 8-year-old version of you, it might communicate an 8-year-old version speak, and that's very common, very normal. The third question that you would ask it is, what are you afraid will happen if you don't do this? Like if you don't show up? I was actually listening to, I do parts work with my clients, and sometimes we ask these questions or different questions, or we get to know, or whatever, and variations on a theme. And I was actually listening to the Pure Desire podcast recently with what's her name? Ramirez.
Jenna Ramirez.
Yeah, Jenna Ramirez, who wrote the book Altogether You, right. And she was talking about parts work, and she reminded me of that question: what are you afraid of if you don't show up? And I was like, oh, that's such a good one, because it's not just learning about why, it's not just learning about why the part is there. It's like, what is your fear if you don't act out in this way? What are you afraid is going to happen if you don't yell? What are you afraid is happen if you don't make me really uncomfortable? What are you afraid is going to happen if you don't make me ruminate, right? Like, that can be a very deep answer. And that can provide like a tremendous amount of awareness that you didn't previously have if it answers that question for you. Yeah. That one can be huge. So definitely don't miss that one. And then the fourth one is, what do you need to feel safe? So, you could say, what do you need from me to feel safe? Maybe it needs you to communicate something, to set a boundary. Or you could say, what do you need to feel safe just generally? And maybe it's something that you need to do, or maybe it's something totally symbolic. Like if it is a little kid version of you, maybe it's like, you know what, like I need a teddy bear, or I need the little anger emoji next to me to make me feel like I'm protected, or I need a hug, or, whatever that little version of you needed to feel a little more safe, a little more calm, a little more loved, a little more protected. So I hope this kind of maybe gives you like a new insight, a new perspective, a different way of thinking around this emotion. These questions certainly can be easier if they are implemented, with a coach, with a therapist, with somebody that kind of runs you through this, especially if it's the first time. But you can also journal these questions out and just free flow it from your subconscious. You can use this tool in the moment as emotions escalate, and as you feel your heart rate increasing and your breathing sort of get quicker, you can, step out of the room, do some chest tapping, have that quick conversation, identify the emotion, learn about it a little bit more, get to know that emotion in all of its nuances, and understand it on a deeper level.
And what's interesting is you're talking about this, anger is such a scary emotion. Sometimes it has, sometimes people can use a synonym of violence with anger or whatever that may be. But, this process that you talked about, and maybe you don't need to tap your chest as much, really applies to a lot of emotions that you can get into. And recovery work is really, really important to connecting with whatever emotions you're feeling in the moment, whether that's sadness or resentment or just, feeling lost or whatever that may be. This whole process is not just for anger. Right. It's actually one that you can use across the board as you're experiencing these different emotions.
Oh yeah, 100%. So I'm going to wrap that concept up with, when, like we mentioned towards the beginning, anger is more of an activating emotion. Grief, for example, would be more of a freeze or maybe of a deactivating. So this little section that I'm going to talk about would be a little bit different depending on what the emotion is. And this is where this recommendation is more specific to anger. So you've gone through this phase where you've chest tapped, you've calmed down a little bit, you understand what it is, you've had a conversation. So now maybe you kind of have this realization of, okay, my next steps are blank, whatever that conversation brought to your awareness that you need to do next to help this be resolved. Let's say though, you're still a little activated. Maybe this was a big argument. Maybe it was a big topic. Maybe it was a really deep emotional wound for you. And so the activation is really, really strong. In a lot of situations, the simple act of acknowledging the emotion, coming to an awareness of it, and agreeing to take action on it is enough to calm it down. Like in, 60, 70% of the situations. But let's say that the emotion is so strong, you understand it, you have complete awareness of it, and you're still super activated. You're going to want to match the level of activation with an activity of similar activation level. So with anger being more activating than deactivating, you're going to think, okay, maybe I can take a walk outside. Let me change my environment, breathe some fresh air, and move my body. Or maybe I can do something like jumping, right? So we're thinking about activating behaviors. Some other things that you can do, though, specifically with charged emotions like anger, you can yell into a pillow or punch a pillow. You can take ice outside and throw it on the ground. So you're breaking something, but in a safe and contained environment that doesn't hurt. It doesn't actually break anything, right? Ice isn't something that really matters, like a glass or, a jar that you use anywhere in the house or anything like that. Or you could go, get $2 china, but ice is so nice because there's no cleanup involved, right? You just take it, it breaks kind of like ice on the outside, and then you don't have to do anything, it just melts, right? So ice is a great idea for that, to just throw on the ground and get some of that energy moving out of your body. And another thing that is really helpful for sometimes for people is to write a letter. So specifically if you're angry, at someone else, but I would even say if you're angry at yourself, this could help. But a lot of times if it's like anger at a specific person and you're just really activated, you can write a letter to that person without any filter or censorship, things that you wouldn't say to them in real life, things that you would not have in a conversation, things that you would regret saying out loud. You get it all out in some format in a letter, and then you do something with that. You crumple it up and throw it really far into a trash can, you burn it, you tear it up and then throw it away. All of those are examples of ways that you can match a behavior with the level of activation that the emotion is bringing for you, and it can actually help continue to move the energy through your body, which is ultimately the goal. So again, we're not saying anger is bad. We're saying this is a really activating emotion. Let me use tools. Let me learn why it's here. Let me make a decision about what to do about it. And then if the energy still needs to move through the body, here are some other ways I can continue to help it move. We're not suppressing it. We're not clenching it and holding it into the body. We're not storing it. We're not stuffing it. We're not saying it's bad. We're offering it compassion. We're offering it ways to move through the body, and we're offering it resolution. We hope that this episode was helpful. So we talked about healthy anger is when a boundary is crossed, when a wrong has been done, but it motivates you to instigate change, or when you acknowledge it as an emotion and utilize healthy processing tools like we just talked about. And it's not really healthy when it's expressed to others in an unproductive or unsupportive or mean way. It's not healthy when it's holding on to or suppressing a deeper emotion, not allowing more vulnerable emotions to come up to the surface and be processed. And it's not healthy when it's hurting you, keeping you stuck and keeping you from moving forward in your healing journey. So we hope that you will take some of the processing tools and exercises that we suggested towards the end there and practice some of those this week if anger is something that you struggle with. And again, I think this is bi-directional. Betrayed partners struggle with anger, addicts struggle with anger. I think humans struggle with anger in general. It's not a bad thing. It's all about learning why it's there and understanding what are some healthy ways that we can help it move through the body and get some resolution.
And the last thing is just remember this takes practice, because a lot of us haven't done it ever. And so you don't learn how to do it one time. You're going to have to keep trying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. It's definitely exercise to practice over and over and over. And then also, again, I think this is, these are the types of tools that you can get reiterated through therapy, through coaching, through support, through accountability, people that can help you continue to navigate this and keep you thinking through it and help you identify, like if, for example, you're able to go, yes, I think there are some more vulnerable emotions there, but you're struggling identifying those or struggling allowing them to come up. Again, we always encourage both parties whenever possible to get one-on-one support because it's just so much more helpful. It's so much easier to identify patterns, in somebody else's life than it is to solve our own. And it's like every doctor needs a doctor, every coach needs a coach, every therapist needs a therapist, right? Like we can be the most intelligent, self-reflective people. And it's just helpful to have somebody else who knows this system guide us through and help us talk through these things, because you're going to, a comment is going to be made one day in a session where you go, I never thought about it that way, right? And it's just so helpful. So if you are a B-Trade partner and you need support, there's a link in the not comments.
Show notes.
Show notes. Thank you. Brain blip. There's a link in the show notes to book a connection call if you need that support. But also if you're working with a therapist or a counselor or a coach, bring this concept up to them about processing deep emotions and ask them what tools and resources they have to help you on this journey. Until next week, we will see you then.
Woohoo! If you're listening to this, it means you've made it through an entire episode. Part of recovery is spending time engaging in healing and self-growth activities. We are thankful that you chose our podcast to be one of those activities today. Make sure you reward yourself for that accomplishment. If you've enjoyed this episode or this podcast, we would love to hear from you. Please take just a few moments to leave a rating and review, letting us know your experience with Recover You. We not only love hearing how these episodes are helpful, but ratings and reviews help others just like you who are searching for recovery information and support find the podcast too. We can't wait to hear from you. See you next week.